Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Good evening. Welcome to Soul, with best-selling Texas author and sacred site traveler, Teal Gray. Coming to you on WBHM-DB Radio. Teal, what's on for tonight?
Good evening and welcome to Soul. I'm your host, Teal Gray, coming to you live on WBHM-DB Radio out of Birmingham, Alabama. My co-host tonight is author Tui Snider, and our special guest is Daniel Allen Jones. Now, Tui, welcome, and thank you so much for being my co-host tonight. I know you have a new YouTube live show, Tombstone Tuesdays now. Congratulations. And, as you come on, would you take just a couple minutes and tell us about it? And then we'll bring on Daniel.
Well, sure. And thanks so much for inviting me to co-host tonight, Teal. I'm really excited. I heard Daniel speak last month, and I'm excited to chat with him about his new book. But you did ask about my show, and I have a new show. It's called Tombstone Tuesdays, and it streams live on YouTube every week. On Tuesdays, shocker. But you can catch the replays anytime, of course. And the show is about historic cemeteries and the weird stories and the people who love exploring them. I have a guest every week and I interview them. And like, for instance, this week I had the author Kathy Benjamin on. She wrote this really great book. It's called Funerals to Die For. It's a very tongue-in-cheek look at some of the strange but true aspects of funeral history. So the show, yes, it's about cemeteries, but it's a lot of fun, and you just might learn something interesting history and cemetery symbolism along the way. So
perfect. Well, I love it, and I was really honored to be a guest on there. So it's a lot of fun, and really, you learn. I've listened to your other shows, and you learn so much of the history, sometimes even of a certain area or something, and no matter what your interest level, I think you could definitely find something to enjoy on your show.
You were a very popular guest, by the way. I'm still getting comments about it. Yes, of course I had to have you first.
I'm flipping my hair as we speak. Well, thank you, and I'm excited to get that book out. That we talked about just so everybody who's listening knows, and you can look up. If you go on to YouTube, you look up her show and listen to it. But it was about my ninth great grandfather, Obadiah Wheeler, who is considered, and many books are written about him as the greatest, or one of the greatest carvers of his time. So, you can check that out. But I want to turn our attention to our very special guest, and I know our dear friend to both of us, Daniel Allen Jones. He is the creator and host of the Vortex, a media network which explores the mysteries of this world and the beyond. Daniel has interviewed, and I just love his interviews. He's done so many great and interesting interviews with people in the field of unexplained phenomenon, UFOs, scientific breakthroughs, you name it. Daniel has talked to them about it. And so, Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hey, Teal. Hey, Tui. It's great to be back both with you again. And I'm really excited to be here. It's awesome. I think the last time we were all together was just almost a year and a half, it seems, ago at the International UFO Congress. So I'm glad to be here.
Yes. Well, I tell you what, that was a great time and so many great people, and you did some really great work there. I'd love for you to talk about that in a bit. And Tui was a guest speaker even. So, she took me to the event as her plus one. So I was like, I got to be, her arm candy for the weekend. So it was great fun. But, and sometimes, like that event, I got to spend some time where with your little small alien friend who's very popular.
Yeah, that was kind of a fun time to be able to bring around Ned, who, of course, Tui knows Ned as well. He is the city of Aurora, Texas, little mascot, I guess you could say, from their historic UFO crash from back in 1897. And I was taking him around when we could still have conferences and everything like that for a few
back
years.
in the day.
Right. And everywhere that I took him, I would get him a little button or a patch or pin or something to put on his shirt. And, he's in a wheelchair because, of course, he was in a bad crash. So this little alien Ned gets a lot of attention and people love to go and take pictures with him. So he's actually hanging out in Aurora these days at their new party patio, which they call Area 114. Of course, because it's right off Highway 114.
I love it.
Martian Margaritas. So
wow.
It's just there for people to come visit and get pictures. And so it's kind of fun, but I like to visit them every once in a while. Yeah. And, that was a great time because that was before we had the shutdown and people were still able to get together at big events. And I had a great time being able to connect with people and do some interviews. And so it was a lot of fun.
It really was. And I tell you, you're very talented. You're a gifted musician, drummer. You take amazing photographs and they're just brilliant. And the way that you put your interviews together, I can only imagine the book is going to be amazing. There's one photo that I just have to say has got to be my all-time favorite at this moment of you, is the one of you with the Mystery Stone in Los Lunas, New Mexico. What was that like to experience?
Yeah, thanks. So it's really interesting being able to explore and study a lot of these different topics dealing with the unknown, the unexplained. That particular photo or set of photos was about a stone that I had first heard of years ago when I was looking into OOPARTs, which is an acronym for out of place artifacts. Basically, things that exist in places or time frames that maybe they shouldn't. And this gives us the idea that there's something, maybe an alternative form or mode of history that we don't really know much about that could mean a lot. And so when we're dealing with this mystery stone, I had just read about it online and seen a few different things here and there, and just didn't really know much about where it was actually located other than a few people I had talked to throughout the years saying, it's out in the desert somewhere in New Mexico. And that doesn't really help, but I actually was able to track it down, and Los Lunas is about 30 minutes or so south of Albuquerque. And it's on a sort of nearby reservation land. I'm not really too sure if it lies right on the reservation or if it's just part of a neighboring region. But I went there. I was actually just alone by myself, as I am a lot of the time when I go out to some of these places. But I was able to locate it using some of the information that I could find online. There isn't really a direct guide or a video or anything telling exactly how to get there or find it. There's not really signs. While you're going out there, though, into this region, there are some etchings into rocks that are arrows. Basically, they're trying to kind of point you into the right direction, but nothing like an official historical marker or anything of that sort. But the stone itself is interesting because of what it has on it. And that basically is what makes it the mystery stone. And it's also known as the Decalogue stone because what it has is an inscription. Someone has carved in writing that seems to be some kind of Paleo-Hebrew. And that would imply that if someone was writing that information at that point in that written language, it would have been maybe 2,000 to 2,500 years ago, or at least that was the last time it was actively in use. People can still write in that language today, but it's not a functioning written language. So
that's so interesting.
It's pretty fascinating to think that maybe some group of Hebrew people made it to the Americas in biblical times and settled upon what they call Hidden Mountain and used it maybe as a fortress or somewhat of a dwelling because it oversees the land for miles. And it's actually really an incredible view. If you had seen that, you might have seen, I use this picture sometimes, like on Facebook. I think my cover photo is from Hidden Mountain. I'm kind of overlooking
Where you're standing
really
up on
vast
that
landscape.
tall. Yes, you're right
Right.
on the edge, and I feel like saying, Daniel, my gosh, one more foot is too much. You're right there. Oh, it's such a beautiful photograph. Amazing.
Thanks. Well, that's Hidden Mountain, and that's on the top. So down on the slope is where that mystery stone is, that Decalogue stone. And what it is, it seems to be an abbreviated form of the Ten Commandments. And so I think it's really interesting to consider that, some people at some point in history wrote that on the stone. And obviously someone has found and known about it for a while. There are, little forms of writing that say silly things like home and just all these little pictures that, people throughout the years have come and messed with. But the stone itself is still there. Someone's etched out the very first commandment, but all the other ones are there. And I actually have done a video on it. I haven't released that one yet. I'm working on getting some of those done. And I should say, by the way, for every video or interview that I have on my channel on the Vortex, there are probably 2 or 3 more that I haven't published on there. And always attempting to make some progress on. So
you're
I appreciate you taking the time to look at that. Yeah. There's a lot of things to be able to try to get done, and I'm just doing the best I can. But I think that the little I can do to contribute to these fields and to encourage people to get out and explore and be involved is what I enjoy. And so going to Las Lunas was a really interesting experience. I was fortunate to be able to get there and find it, and I hope to be able to share that video with anyone that's interested, because if it does imply that there are things in our history which would overwrite our conventional understanding or models, I think that's important for us to consider and to really examine in a serious way.
Oh, absolutely. It's great work that you're doing. And it is important. It really is. It not just to the curious mind, but to the foundation of knowledge. You're doing a great job. And I hope this isn't too personal to bring up to, now the world, but, congratulations. As I understand, you just got a 4.0 and wrote 2 amazing papers on your studies. Can we mention that now that I have?
Sure. Yeah. It does, I think, tie into these things a little bit, as well as what the main focus, or a few of the main focuses of my book I'm working on consist of, which is archaeology and anthropology, 2 courses that I was, somehow able to find time to do this last fall semester. And in doing so, I was able to explore a few different areas of lesser known or less conventional, or maybe unconventional concepts. And I think that it's important that we look to see how some of these methods and archaeology and anthropological studies can help us in a way that gives us ideas about what something could mean in our future, like the discovery of a non-human intelligence and what that can mean when we integrate that understanding into our society, how we start to integrate those discoveries at a larger scale rather than just making a declaration. And I think that when we're talking about archaeology, of course, something like the Mystery Stone falls into that category of something that maybe not as well known and maybe not have a lot of credence to some people or in some people's view. But if we look at what we can do to understand what we're dealing with in these fields in a way that can help us understand more about our history and more about who we are as a people, where we're going, and what that'll mean for us when we are 100 years down the road, or 500 or 1,000, and what that can mean for us to be able to look back in history equally as long ago or further to see what we can find out about things which are still very unclear to us. So when we look at these different things anthropologically or archaeologically, I'm fascinated in how we can apply some of these methods to the study of non-human intelligence, whether that's forms of alien or extraterrestrial life, whether it's forms of non-physical civilizations that exist in some other dimension or part of our universe, which we barely understand. So my 2 papers that I was really excited to be able to work on basically covered some of these in a way that we use methods and techniques to develop what we're basically going to have to understand, I would think, in our future. So the anthropology research proposal was called Anthropological Implications of Advanced Civilizations and Developing Techniques to Interface with Non-Human Intelligence. The archaeology assignment that I had, that I basically wrote in tandem with this one, was the discovery of hidden structures designed by advanced non-human intelligence and developing detection methods for xenoarchaeology, cryptocultures, and occulted civilizations. So, in a nutshell, xenoarchaeology, xeno means foreign or alien, and this doesn't necessarily have to mean just extraterrestrials, but if something's foreign to us, it could mean something that we look at in the fields of the supernatural or paranormal as non-corporeal entities, or what may be considered spirits, or things that seem to be non-physical in nature. So I think that these all fall into this sort of umbrella term of xeno or xenology, which I'm really fascinated in, because the more we start to explore these areas and what we see in paranormal studies and anomalous archaeology, I think that the further we develop in ourselves through our own evolution and technology and advances, that we might be able to really help shed some light on these mysteries in a scientific way that will, really pave the way for our future.
Well, it is so interesting, and again, congratulations on your work, because that's just, to me, what I consider, work like that is just, it's a foundation, for understanding that you're bringing forward and also adding to, and it's a wonderful, important work. And later in the show, I want to talk to you about an interview that you had recently with Charles Halt on the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident that happened 40 years ago. And for anybody that doesn't know, of course, Daniel will tell you all about it later, but Charles was the deputy base commander at the time of the encounter in 1980, but it seemed, like there was so much more to it than was ever let out before that is now coming forward. So that is also going to be interesting to hear about. But we have to go to break. When we come back, I'm going to turn it over to Tui Snider and Daniel, and they're going to go through and talk about his upcoming book. So everybody stay tuned. Again, this is Teal Gray. We are on Soul to Soul and coming to you live on WBHM-DB radio. We'll be back in just a couple minutes.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk radio.
You're listening to WBHM
Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back, everyone, to Soul. This is your host, Teal Gray, coming to you live from WBHM-DB Radio out of Birmingham, Alabama. We have been talking to our special guest, Daniel Allen Jones, and we are going to be hearing more about his work and his interviews in different fields of the unknown and encounters and everything coming up. But I want to turn this interview over to my co-host, Tui Snider, and Daniel, so y'all can really explore the upcoming book you have coming out, because there's so many people excited now and messaging me like they can't wait to hear about that. So Tui, I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to you and Daniel for a bit.
All right.
Sure.
Now, I am excited to dig into this topic because I heard and really enjoyed the presentation that Daniel gave for the Anomaly Archives last month. And he was talking about a new book he has coming out. His first book he's writing. It's called Mythical Operating System, or Mythos for short. And I figured, it makes sense for you to start off by telling us, what do you mean by mythical operating system?
Well, that's a great question, because I realize whenever you publish a work, sometimes when something personal becomes more public, it's hard for there to be a sense of context without there being an immediate sense of relevance. And of course, to me, mythos, it means something specific. And I think I am hoping to convey that in a very simple and practical way in the book. But mythos is essentially, as you said, mythical operating system. It is simply our own individual frame of mind. It is our collective reality. It is a scalar system of experience. And I think that it's not a new way of thinking or of attempting to encapsulate known concepts. It is simply the pre-existing world that we live in and how we view it personally, and as a society, and as a collective whole of humanity and everything beyond that. So when I say mythos, or when we're talking about what mythos is, it can be understood in different ways or different scales. So my own mythos, for instance, might be how I view the world and operate within it. It is, as we talk about, a mythical operating system. And that means that what I view and what I perceive and what I experience is all something that is going to be determining my own reality and my own understanding of reality based upon the building blocks that are presented to me, whether I consider them to be facts or whether someone believes this or that. It's really important to understand that everything that we perceive is interpreted through our senses, and that we have physical senses and we may have some non-physical senses that help build a more grand scope of reality. And so mythos is that entirety which we can view as people individually, groups of people in society, or just humanity as a whole, or whatever lies beyond that. So I know that's a lot to really consider, but the simple way to think about it is it's our world. It's how we view the world. It's how we understand it, how we operate within it, what we can do to develop further in our understanding of reality through our own consciousness and how we can sort of navigate through this system of operation in a way that gives us a better understanding about who we are and what we're doing.
I like that. It feels very fractal in a way when you were describing Mythos to me when I was listening to your talk. But one of the things that was a takeaway for me from your talk, and let me know if I jibes with what you mean or not, but I felt like you were saying that by increasing our understanding and then integrating that, integrating our understanding of the unexplained, that might actually help move us forward, like create a sort of spiritual evolution. That was one of the chunks of, I don't know, a takeaway I got from your talk. Was that on the right track there?
That's a really good way to understand, I think, how most scientific breakthroughs or discoveries work, is that we have something that we encounter within nature, and through our encounter, it challenges us. It presents us an obstacle that we have to work on socially. And that appears to us in many forms, because just like we were talking about the mystery stone or something of similar nature, when we go and make these discoveries, they work in different ways. It can be a personal discovery, or it can be a major scientific discovery that's announced, a declaration is made, and then we integrate that information to the public, thereby setting a new standard for understanding. And I think that's something we can see with utilizing things like electricity and modes of transportation and communication. All of these things now are very normal and commonplace to us, whereas 100 years ago, it was even just a century, it was a completely different world. And through those kinds of steps, we can see that there are probably many cases where people of a prestigious understanding or development in some scientific field, maybe on their own, have achieved that discovery for themselves or for their close group. And maybe some of those things were never announced, released, or integrated in a more collective way. And I think a good example of this is Nikola Tesla.
Exactly. I was thinking of him as you were saying, and I was like, it sounds like Tesla.
It's something that we probably, we know of Tesla now, and a lot of people are really fascinated by his work, and I think that's amazing. But think about all the Nikola Teslas that we don't know about, that were all throughout history, that were way ahead of their time, that just didn't really fit in maybe in a way, or didn't have the platform, or were secluded for whatever reason, or basically just exiled from some form of the society because of what they were doing or what they were involving themselves with. And then we don't ever get to understand what could have been. And I think that that's how we can understand the integration of information, especially when we're dealing with the unknown. When we're dealing with these mysteries of reality, it's what drives us or repels us. And if we don't really confront it in a way that is serious and looking at how we can help to really explore this in a scientific way or spiritual way, whatever it is, we can really find that maybe there's a lot we can learn. Because if we look at it, and those are the obstacles I was saying, we make an encounter in nature, and at first it might not seem to fit within our understanding. But we have to also understand that our limited scope of reality doesn't mean that it can't contain something beyond that nature is still capable of. And I think that when we deal with like the supernatural or paranormal, these are sort of ideas that we've constructed of things that might really be normal parts of nature that we just find are a bit more of a rare, or to us, anomalous occurrence. So when we examine a lot of these things like UFOs, like Teal had mentioned with the Rendlesham Forest case, or we look at strange artifacts or unknown creatures and encounters that seem to basically attest to something beyond what we're supposed to think is normal, all of these types of encounters and discoveries help propel us or put us back. And we have to look at all the times that maybe things have happened where we've been set back, maybe like the burning of the Library of Alexandria, or the destruction of the Mayan codices. All of these types of social upheavals are problematic in different ways, but also they can provide us an opportunity to benefit and actually, I think, develop progressively, even to the point that maybe we become more aware that, let's say, eventually we don't look at some of these strange paranormal mysteries or aspects of the unknown in the same way that we did 100 years ago. Or in 100 years, maybe we'll look back and say, wow, there were people who were talking about this for a long time and they were ridiculed and mocked, but it turns out that they were pretty, much right on the correct idea. And so we have to understand that some of these things have been discussed and examined for a long time. I'm really interested in a few different examples of these, primarily being ufology, cryptozoology, parapsychology, anomalous archaeology, xenology, basically interacting with intelligence that is not in human form. And I think that whatever that comes in, if people think it's ghosts, if it's spiritual, if it's supernatural, if it's alien, whatever it's perceived in whatever social, cultural relevance. And we have to also understand that each culture has their own outlook on these things, good, bad, positive, negative, all of these things. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that is the best for us, and it can actually become very problematic if we have a sort of encounter of information that becomes a hindrance to our development. And I think that what we're seeing, especially now with like the pandemic and all of this, we're finding out that maybe the idea of something like a virus or a plague or some kind of illness that is unknown, or maybe not just unknown, but also in some ways invisible because we can't really see it. And, from the advent of the microscope, we understand more about microbiology, bacteria, virology, and all of these things were really not understood hundreds of years ago. And if people get sick, they think it might have been some kind of way that either a divine force was at play or that there was something in nature that was deemed good or bad. And we have to also consider that this is an ongoing theme in our own reality now with things that we currently don't understand, that we attribute to certain ideas that we just use as placeholders. And that's also something we call God of the gaps, which we don't understand it. It's because God did it, or it's because something that we like to try to make sense of. I'm of the impression, or I like to advocate that science is helpful if we utilize scientific methods in understanding parts of our reality. I think technology and engineering are really helpful with what we can accomplish. And I know that some people are concerned about how that might affect us, and looking at how something like AI and computer assisted learning might be a detriment. And I think that's a realistic outlook, but we also have to consider the benefit that we can gain from something like this as well. Because in my view, when we look at some of these fields dealing with UFOs and paranormal activity and just anomalous phenomena, to me it seems that we can always attempt to connect with that organically or as people, using our senses, using our mind. And then if we look at how our technology is advancing and at the rate by which it is advancing, using Moore's law, like processing power becoming exponentially more powerful every year, eventually we'll find that some of the ways that we have to detect this information and to detect certain processes at play and phenomena at play that are all around us will start to shed light on how maybe some of these things aren't supernatural, so to speak, but are rather just parts of reality that are somewhat veiled to us. And this really dives into some interesting ideas about what reality is, the fabric of space-time, the world we live in, and different things about how we can understand what we're dealing with, the medium through which we exist in. And I've really been fascinated by what people are referring to as simulation theory or the simulation argument or hypothesis.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
And this is a big part of what I am covering in the book as well, is it's not necessarily to get people to believe any one particular thing, but it's an examining and analysis of different viewpoints and different facets of something that I think might help glean some insight as to what nature is and what our world is. And again, that's what the mythos, which the title is referring to. And that's kind of how it works in a way that is relevant to us, is by what way do we view reality? And through that reality, is there a collective connection between each of those individuated perspectives and how it's tangible or malleable to each person? And is there a way to understand it in a bigger picture as well? So you have people who think about that bigger picture, but also how we work within that bigger picture as, like you said, Tui, fractals. And that's a big part of it, is because someone who I had the honor of connecting with and meeting and interviewing, Nassim Haramein, who's part of the Resonance Foundation, has a pretty interesting model. You could say kind of the theory of everything type model that Einstein and other people have alluded to and worked on. You basically have something that attempts to explain all of different parts of the universe in tandem.
We always strive for that, don't we? We want it all nice and tidy.
Right. And he refers to it, Nassim, he kind of has this idea as the hollow fractal universe. And to me, it's something that I think makes sense. I don't know that it's an
ancient idea too. You think of Indra's loom, with the Hindi. I mean, it's new to us in a way, but it's also ancient, which I sorry to interject, but I liked how you mentioned that a lot in your talk, how you weren't you were looking forward to new tech, but you also were looking back. And I was like, yeah, you got to look both ways.
You're right on it. I think that's the point, is that a lot of people have known about these different ideas for a long time, but in their own cultural context. And a good example is like what you said. If we look at something simple like the idea of the world being something of an illusion or illusory, this is not a new concept. And if anything, it helps us see that this has sort of been around for a while in a way that gives us the idea that what we're experiencing is made up of things which maybe aren't as real as we think they are, or at least we make them real through our perception. So I think it would be great to cover
shift a little. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You have this idea of Maya, which is basically a Vedic Indian concept from ancient India. Maya basically means illusion. And this is something which they attribute to how the world is that it's all an illusion. And not to say it all doesn't matter, but that we live within this construct. And it's important to understand why we're inside or within or a part of all of this reality and what we can do to learn from it, to develop ourselves. And I think that it would be great to kind of touch upon something that I could refer to as sort of the simulation theory history in sort of a succinct way. When we have a moment here, I know we're coming up here pretty soon, I think, for another break.
Oh, go for it.
Well, I'll just say really quick, you have, like you said, we have Maya, which is around, some people say, 400 AD or so, or before the Common Era. It's kind of a good way to think about how that was documented, but has probably been known for much longer than that. You have Rene Descartes. He had this idea called the evil demon. This was about 1641. Yeah. This is an idea that this evil demon is just this, basically a sort of an overlord that controls the whole world and is showing you all of these different things which are actually not real, but are supposed to trick you into thinking they are real. And then from there, you just continue on. You have things like the double slit experiment in the 1800s, which people are still
even at Plato's cave. I mean, they're just getting distracted by the shadows behind them and thinking that's their reality. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And you have all these things, and the double slit experiment is important because it shows that an observer helps to in some way affect the nature of reality. So this is getting into the 1900s with Max Planck, who discusses quantum mechanics, and then you have
and even
quantum
my very
all this.
scientific husband can't argue against that. You know, the little double slit thing.
And it's a really important part of how we understand the fabric of reality. When you have an observer, which is somewhat of a conscious awareness, observing another aspect of reality, it changes. And if it's not being observed, then it becomes a different quality. And that's really interesting to think about how reality itself is malleable when you factor in awareness. And then, throughout the years, you have basically the concept of modern computing by Turing. And you have the Turing test in the 50s. And the first computer game of tic-tac-toe was basically, something that was very revolutionary. And I think that's really important to see that games are essentially a simulation. And of course, we continue on and we see the first computers coming into being by Konrad Zuse. And you're going through the 50s and 60s, and eventually, you get through the years and you have many different people looking at this in a serious way. The Matrix comes out and it really opens up the social world to this idea that the world is maybe not what we thought it was. And of course, the big part, I think, to what gives this credence scientifically is what's called the simulation argument paper by Professor Nick Bostrom. And this was in 2003.
Oh, wow. I think we're coming up on our break. I don't know how. Well, I'm sure they'll come in. Teal will let us know.
Go ahead and finish your thought, Daniel, and then we'll go into that. You still have about a half minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I think that's a really good place to kind of hit off from, because Bostrom is someone who really has spearheaded the work for this idea. We can kind of pivot from there to some other things, but I just wanted to get to that point to where in the early 2000s, this was really being highly considered at an academic level as to what reality is, what it consists of, and if we're in his computer or his paper basically arguing or asking the question, are you living in a computer simulation? And I think that that's something that might sound really bizarre to a lot of people, but we'll see how that can be understood in different ways when we look at a variety of strange experiences and anomalous phenomena, and kind of getting back into ideas that we were describing that I know, Teal, you were interested in covering, things like Rendlesham and whatever else. So, I think that it would be a good way to kind of transition to the next segment here.
Perfect. Well, let's do that. This is Teal Gray, Daniel Allen Jones, and Tui Snider coming to you from Soul to Soul. We'll be right back after we hear from our sponsors.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Soul to Soul. This is your host, Teal Gray, and we are coming to you live on WBHM-DB radio out of Birmingham, Alabama. Tonight, boy, you have had a great special guest in Daniel Allen Jones and a wonderful co-host with Tui Snider. I'm going to turn the discussion back over to them because Daniel had some amazing thoughts he needs to finish. And then after that, we'll talk about his interview and with sorry, I just blanked out, with his interview and with Charles, and hear more about what he has to think now with Tui.
Well, gosh, I don't know where do you want to go with this now, Daniel? There's so much more. Which bunny hole do you want to hop down?
We just left off with the paper written in 2003, which we refer to as the Simulation Argument by Nick Bostrom. And throughout the years, more recent years, I should just say that this really picked up a lot of steam, and people were looking at it in a more serious scientific light, not just from an entertainment point of view. You have the movie The Matrix, which got really popular, but then you started having people understand that there's a lot more to reality than we really think or see. And so there's a paper that came out in 2017 called On Testing the Simulation Theory by Caltech. In 2018, you had statements from Elon Musk, who is, of course, a extremely...
even Stephen Hawking.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big names. This is not just
figures.
a wacky, out there, fringy thing. If for anybody who might be listening, kind of thinking that this is like serious minds thinking about this. I love that.
Yeah, Elon Musk has been outspoken on this idea. Like you said, Stephen Hawking had his holographic universe concept, which does tie a lot into these things as well. You have people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, and
he's
Michio
very
Kaku,
mainstream. I mean,
and they have talked on this publicly, and I think that just having people that are scientific spokespeople for various organizations or institutions is an important part of the publicity to this sort of understanding of this concept. Of course, in 2018, quantum entanglement was confirmed by MIT, and this is something that is really kind of a bizarre concept, but it's basically you have different subatomic particles that are being affected by some stimulus or stimuli that makes one thing happen in one place, and that same thing happen to a different set of quantum particles in a completely different place, to show that basically what we talk about with like bilocation and these sort of paranormal ideas on a more macro scale.
I gotta say something about that, about the entanglement, because this is something that just blows me away, and it's something my husband and I talk about, and he had a really great thought on it. He said, Einstein called it spooky action at distance, because wow, how could these two particles, how could they affect each other even though they're 1,000 miles away? But when you think about string theory and how they talk about how there might be how there are several different dimensions, what if on one of those dimensions these two particles are right on top of each other, so there is no distance when they move? Anyway, I had to say that because he brought that up the other day, and I'm like, oh yeah, well that makes sense. Go back in time and tell Einstein.
I think Larry's great. He's doing some really interesting science and experiments and engineering on his own, and I think that's what life is all about, is being able to explore those things in whatever capacity you can. And to whatever degree we can ask these questions, I think is important too. So like you said, Einstein was really interested in that spooky action at a distance because it was challenging him. And he had a hard time with understanding how that was supposed to work and fit into, the ideas that he was saying. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the idea, is that, we have all these different things, which we think, of course, a lot of these big people and even Einstein said a lot of things that might attribute to some of these things. When we look at what's happening, it gives us a sort of bigger picture, and maybe some people believe this, or they might be more oriented to these ideas or train of thought. That, like you said, that's our personal mythos. And in a more collective scale, we might be able to ascertain information about those dimensions, and if it's, these parts of theories, like you said, string theory. Well, what's great, and Michio Kaku, who I've met, he's talked about this a lot. He says, with string theory, you have different dimensions. People think about 11 dimensions, but the string theory essentially is a sub theory to what's called M theory, which is membrane theory. So you take all the strings and they're bound together, which creates a membrane or sort of surface that they're all sort of in a continuum. And like you said, it just shows that they're all connected in some way that is
seems like a big distance, but something's going on.
So, yeah, I think that there's a lot to it. There's a lot to how we understand the material nature of the universe and the immaterial. Because if, let's say, we look at all the things that we are made of, atoms and particles, it's really interesting because there's so many brilliant scientists and just different figures out there who have commented on these things. And I think it was Niels Bohr who said, all the things that we consider real are made up of things that are not real. And that makes us wonder, what's really happening to give us this impression of reality that our mind decides to say, well, this is real. We decide it's real, so it is. And, on that note, we discussed how, at the beginning, we were all last together at the International UFO Congress in 2019. There was also someone there who we may have all crossed paths with. His name was Rizwan Virk, and he is actually the author of a book called Simulation Theory. And so he actually has really taken a lot of these different ideas in some way and compiled them into his book, which is really great. I definitely recommend checking that out. It's sort of a staple, I think, because he does help to show Bostrom's work along with others, and how different things like games and video games and virtual reality are advancing to such a degree that will soon, if this continues, of course, will be indistinguishable from reality. And that's a really interesting concept. And just at the end of last year, there was a patent to basically upload consciousness or various aspects of one's consciousness or from people who have passed on into what are being referred to as chat bots. So we can interact with people and some aspect of their consciousness in a virtual way. This was just announced.
It's interesting stuff.
Yeah, these are something that sounds like science fiction, and we're living in very bizarre times. But this is something that I think will actually challenge a lot of people's beliefs. It'll challenge people's ways of thinking and their understanding of their own life, their own sort of spirituality, their own mythos. And what's really great is that we have a lot of these fascinating mysteries to study, to examine, to see how do they fit in with our world? How do they fit in with our own understanding? Some people, they filter it out because it doesn't seem to fit. And I think that's a bit of a travesty, when like we said, when we were encountering something and instead of allowing the obstacle to help us push forward, it repels us back. And that can happen a lot of times.
They react with so much fear. I think that, you mentioned scientists who've tried to, who've ended up, in jail or just they never get their discoveries out because of all the fear in their era.
Right. I think that it's something that really is a social thing, because like we said, one person can make a discovery or have an encounter, but when we have to integrate that socially to set a new standard of living and way of life and understanding, that's where it challenges a greater part of us. And I think that it's really important to consider all these people, all these incredible figures throughout history. The father of modern computers, the person who basically invented our first computer, actually had this idea. This is a direct quote. His name is Konrad Zuse. He had a book called Rechnender Raum, and his quote is, "The concept of the computing universe is still just a hypothesis. Nothing has been proved. However, I am confident that this idea can help unveil the secrets of nature." And that really is the epitome of what I'm getting at with a lot of these things, is that it may not be that to say that, this is how things are, or that people should believe this. But with technology and with our own advancing abilities, we're going to find out a lot of things, and along the way, it's going to surprise us in many, many facets. But when it comes to issues like understanding certain strange encounters and different ideas of things like UFOs or strange creatures or anomalous phenomena, those types of things help us in some ways to see that, okay, maybe there's something beyond what we would consider normal, or maybe there's just something that is normal about it that we haven't really understood in better detail that has been right here with us the whole time. A good example is I'm fascinated with the field and study of cryptozoology, which is just hidden creatures, animals, and different species which we don't really understand or know about. So when it comes to these types of things, we might find, okay, there's nothing supernatural about some of these, and then with others, maybe there could be something completely bizarre that we don't understand, whether it's physiological, whether it's metaphysical, whatever that is. I think that it's important.
Because people do tend to, I notice in the cryptozoology camp, there are some people who are firmly in the it's a biological entity camp, and then there's some who are like, no, Bigfoot is interdimensional. And I'm always thinking, well, I'm just using Bigfoot as an example. I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes, especially not Bigfoot's. But what I mean, maybe exactly. Why can't there be a biological entity that's also interdimensional? That just overlaps with us every now and then, and so let's
right.
have the book. There's a
and
lot of different.
While our head is pointing up to the possible skies, before we lose time, I want to just ask Daniel, in your interview with Charles Halt, which people can watch the full episode online on your Vortex show, I wanted to get your thoughts quickly about how the seeming flood now of once classified information is now being shared. I think, with everything, I just feel like we're on the crux of sort of a new dawn, or that we're leveling up in our, intelligence and our information and our finds. And I just wanted to see your thoughts on that before we go.
Right. I think that there are a lot of different things being released that are important to pay attention to. I don't know that we're going to get anything extremely substantial that's going to change everyone's mind. We had something kind of like that back at the end of 2017 with the announcement of the Pentagon's UFO investigation program. But with everything happening, I'm not holding my breath for something really big, like the big idea of disclosure. However, I think that the combination of all the facets when it comes to understanding these strange sightings from both the civilian and military and government sectors, the technology behind what's going on in advanced aerospace programs, and what it can do to help corroborate a lot of people's experiences that are referred to as the experiencers, and how those all tie together to maybe something beyond. And I feel like there's a lot to what we can learn. We need to keep paying attention, but at the same time, it's important to also question the authority of what's being announced in such a way that we don't just buy it, we don't just believe it just because, but it's important to weigh that information with discernment. And when it comes to a lot of these well-known or maybe not so well-known cases, you have a lot of really strange things. And just on a quick note with the idea of the Rendlesham Forest case, Charles Halt, deputy base commander, you have a lot of other people, Jonathan Burroughs, you have James Penniston. Jonathan Burroughs apparently got radiated, is what his claim was. You also have James Penniston, who touched the object that they encountered there in Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England in 1980. James Penniston touched an object and had a stream of binary code downloaded into his mind. And it's an extremely confusing, bizarre, and intriguing circumstance that he really didn't want anything to do with, but it happened to be somewhat of an imprint in his mind to such a degree that he later on went to write it all down and found out that it translates to a lot of really interesting information, including coordinates and sort of ominous messages. So that's interesting because we see how binary is simply a form of coding used in computing programs and systems. So that is interesting to see how that might tie into our understanding of reality being a computational system. And
our language,
a lot of these other things connecting to that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to thank you for a fascinating time spending your time with us. We so appreciate it. It's been really interesting. And Tui, thank you for co-hosting. You've been great. I wanted Daniel take this last couple minutes and let everybody know where they can find you and find out more about you.
Right. So I'm glad to connect with anyone interested in furthering the discussion on these types of topics. And what they can do is either go to my YouTube channel to check out the videos that I've put together on the Vortex. That's just youtube.com/thevortex1, like the number 1 at the end. And then you can go to Facebook, where you find me there, my name, Daniel Allen Jones. And you can also send me an email, DanielAllenJones@hotmail.com, or if you happen to be available at some of the few events going on around, in these areas, I look forward to connecting with everyone else in person when we can do that again soon. So, and both of you as well, Tui and Teal, it's been awesome. It's just flown by. So I hope that we can, pick it up again here soon.
Yeah, I would love to have you back on again. Absolutely. And Tui, remind everybody how to reach out to find you.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. I really am looking forward to Daniel's book, The Mythos. And gosh, I didn't even ask any of the questions I had. I enjoyed hearing it so much.
Back again, no doubt. We have to.
But you can find me at tuisnider.com or go to YouTube and just type Tui Snider, Tombstone Tuesdays, any variant there, and I'll probably pop up. But yeah, this was great. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, perfect. Well, I thank you, everybody, for listening globally. We love you and love all the texts and messages we get. And I look forward to seeing you next week on Soul to Soul. This is your host, Teal Gray. Good night, everybody.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.